answer to the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Naomi. I run a charity called Chefs in Schools, and we work directly with schools to help them transform food and food education with a view to improving kids' health. On the point of conflicts, I just wanted to mention the committee. I think you're already aware that Henry Dimbleby is our chair, that Baroness Boycott is one of our patrons, and in terms of our funding, 90% of our funding comes from trusts and foundations and schools and local authorities that we work with. About 10% comes from businesses, of which I think there's only one that supplies any product into schools, and that's primarily an olive oil that they provide to cost price to the schools that we work with. So that's just to get that bit done. To answer the question, I'd like to start with a statistic, and it might be one that you've heard before, but I would just ask that we spend just a couple of seconds thinking about what it really means, which is that 1 in 3 kids in the poorest areas in this country are leaving primary school with obesity. That I just would like us to reflect on. The picture nationally, it's about 1 in 5 kids. That's something I think it's bad for the kids in terms of their health and well-being, but it's also a bit of a ticking time bomb for society. And a lot of the reason for that, we know, is to do with the food environment that kids are growing up in that isn't weighted towards their favour. My experience is specifically in schools, so I'll focus on that. And I'd start with the issue of packed lunches. We know from evidence produced by the University of Leeds that only about 2%, less than 2%, of packed lunches meet the same nutritional standards that are applied to school meals. And in fact, only about 1 in 5 of them are found to have any fresh fruit, fresh veg or salad in at all. So we recognise that there's a problem with the packed lunches going in, which won't surprise us when we look at the wider food environment. And then on the issue of school meals, up front I want to say all the evidence suggests that school meals are hands down better than packed lunches, contain higher amounts of nutrition, lower amounts of processed food. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't some issues within school food that we do also need to be clear-eyed about tackling. A study by Imperial College found that around about 64% of the calories that kids were taking in from meals provided by the school were coming from ultra-processed food, and many of those were foods that were high in fat, sugar and salt. Much worse than secondary schools, I have to say, because of the kind of marketplace of food available. That's the scale and the shape of the problem that we're trying to tackle with, and I just want to very briefly talk about what I think some of the solutions are. I could take this committee to a state school in Streatham, and you could watch a whole bunch of teenagers diving face first into a salad bar to top up their packed lunches. I could put you on the phone with a school chef in Hull who's just graduated from our training programme and has negotiated with her employer, her school, to put oily fish back on the menu because she now feels like she has the skills and knowledge to be able to encourage children to try it. And there are lots of examples of great practice in school food across the country. I would say that we've got a workforce of people who work in kitchens. It's the size of an army who care about kids and who want to do well by them. And what we have to do is give them the environment in which they can do that. We need to give them the training, we need to make sure that they're funded properly, and we need to give the direction through every rule that this government sets, through legislation, through the government procurement rules, to make sure that the right baseline is in place to enable them to do their jobs well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I come to Bea Wilson from Tasted? Yeah. Brief introduction and then your answer.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honoured to be here. As you mentioned, I'm here for Tasted, which is a charity I co-founded nearly 5 years ago with a head teacher from Lincolnshire, who's also here today, called Jason O'Rourke, and a former teacher called Abby Scott. For my day job, I'm a food writer and journalist, and I've written on articles relevant to this committee, including ultra-processed food, non-nutritive sweeteners, and the profound failures of food policy in the UK, in which I referenced a piece which has been mentioned a lot in this committee so far already by Dolly Van Tullochen. But if that sounds depressing, my latest book was a cookbook, and I believe to my core, and all of my work with Tasted has confirmed this, that cooking and eating are among the greatest joys in life, and you are much, much more likely to lead a child or anyone to healthy eating through the excitement of flavour and the pleasures of a shared meal than you are through lectures about fat grams or sugar. When it comes to food, pleasure is crucial, because pleasure is, apart from feeling wonderful, the single greatest reason why anyone picks something up and puts it into their mouth. So to come back to Tasted, Jason and I independently found out about a system of, it's sometimes called taste education, sometimes sensory food education, called SAPERA, which has been used, it's been tried and tested for decades in most of the Nordic countries. It's in Sweden, it's in Finland, it's in Norway, it's in many other countries, including the Netherlands, Singapore, Japan. And we both independently felt, having looked into healthy eating initiatives in schools for years, that it was the missing part of the jigsaw when it came to food education, because it was something that actually equipped a child with new skills for eating, skills which could protect them in an obesogenic world, such as a willingness to try new things and a preference for a range of real whole vegetables. So to come back to your question, which is about the prevalence of poor diets, I think Naomi has summarised it far better than I could. The one thing I would add to that is I sometimes think we talk far too much about obesity crisis, which is a phrase which makes large numbers of people, children or adults, feel awful about their own bodies. I wish we would talk about a food crisis. If you come back to the dictionary definition of food in the OED, it's any nutritious substance that people or animals eat or drink in order to maintain life and growth. And so much of what children are eating isn't doing that job. And I'm not saying forget obesity by any means, but let's talk about teeth. Our chair of trustees is a former paediatric anaesthetist called Jane Lockie, who's partly came to Tastehead because she knows what it's like. So I'm going to start crying. When a child, so I actually can't talk about it, has all of their teeth extracted at the age of 5. 26,000 children aged 5 to 9 in 2018 hospitalised for teeth extraction. Change the subject. Tastehead, that's a happy subject. So we knew that to make it work, we couldn't just go to head teachers and say, we've got this great idea from Finland, you should do it. We knew we had to make it work to a UK context, the reality of teachers' busy lives. We had a long piloting phase, and we've now created a whole library of free lesson plans and resources which can be delivered in the classroom, minimal equipment, no kitchen required. And the beautiful thing about Tastehead, it's joy, it's pleasure, it's fun. So we started off thinking this was a game for young kids, and then we found adults actually enjoy playing it too. Everyone enjoys it. Where you bury different things in the bottom of a sock, and you reach inside. And if you've never felt that before, you can feel it's round, and it's got a kind of knobbly thing on the end. But is it a pomegranate or is it an onion? And I might I don't know if people want to go at this game, but I could pass things around.
I'm afraid we don't have time.
We don't have time. Okay, well, you get the idea. But it's part of what's instructive about this, it again gets to the prevalence, which is that what children say to their teachers while playing these games is very instructive. We've had people say, oh, I've never felt an onion before. And you think, well, that's just a basic lack in a child's life. And it's not just about touch, it's also about listening to things, which the more musical people in the room, such as Lord Krebs, might appreciate. You know, the music of a lettuce leaf or a spinach leaf, you tear it next to your ear. But again, it's instructive, because you'll have children say, oh, I can't eat crunchy foods. And again, that comes back to the tooth decay question. And what we have found is that by exploring food in this totally non-invasive, non-judgmental way, the two rules are no one has to like and no one has to try, that it's actually very, very effective, and there's quite a lot of data to back this up, short-term interventions from Finland, France, South Korea, other countries, that this kind of sensory food education increases a child's willingness to try. And some of our own data, a project led by the University of Roehampton, offering children in 3 different schools 10 sessions of Tastehead, found across those 10 sessions, 85% tried a new fruit or vegetable, and 100% of children liked something that they tried. And we've seen, so I was just going to end with one more thing. A teacher in York reported that a child with autism and sensory needs, whose diet up to then had been mostly basic and devoid of vegetables, learnt to enjoy lettuce during a Tastehead lesson and now asks for lettuce every day with his food.
Excellent. I don't think I'd like lettuce for every meal, every day, but I do like lettuce. Can we move to Georgie, please?
Thank you. Yes, I'm Georgie Branch. I work for the charity School Food Matters, which exists to teach children about food and improve children's access to healthy and sustainable food during their time at school. I've been at the charity for almost 5 years, and during that time I led a COVID food response programme which saw over 1 million breakfasts delivered to low-income families across London. And I currently lead on a programme called Healthy Zones, which aims to support schools to create sustained changes to the food environment that puts children's health first. So, coming to the prevalence of unhealthy diets amongst children and adolescents, there's lots of evidence that they're not eating enough foods which nourish them. They're consuming too little fruit and veg and not enough, and too much foods high in fat, salts and sugar. The Fuel study done in the West Midlands found that when looking at fruit consumption, 70% of adolescents were eating less than 100 grams, which is the equivalent to an apple a day. It's also reported that British children have the highest intake of ultra-processed foods in Europe. And to reiterate the point that Naomi mentioned, that UPFs accounted for 82% of calories in packed lunches and 64% of calories in school meals. Higher UPFs were observed in secondary school children and those in lower income households. The study also found that the UPFs are heavily marketed in more deprived areas, and therefore those children were more likely to choose the UPF foods in schools. And this, again, just reiterates the point that Naomi made, that school meals are more nutritious than packed lunches. It sort of echoes the study done in the University of Leeds. And the food environment does play a role in this. Through our own surveys, we asked thousands of secondary school students if they think it's easy to eat healthily at their schools, and the majority say no. They use reasons, for example, the canteen layout, the sort of queuing, the amount of time they have to eat, the cost of foods, and also the availability of healthy foods and unhealthy foods in school canteens as reasons why it's not easy to eat healthily. And I'm sure we'll come on to speak about the specific influences on the food environment, but just to make the point that the food environment disproportionately affects children from lower income households, and we've seen that for children living in those most deprived areas, they're twice as likely to be obese compared to their peers living in least deprived areas.
Thank you. Anita, your introduction and your answer to the question.
Thank you, Baroness. Good morning. I'm Anita Brown. I'm actually the chair of LASA, the School Food People. We have 1,000 members nationally, and we support both single-site schools, multi-academy trusts, private operators and local authority caterers in the delivery of a healthy school meal, and we support the lobbying and various campaigns. My day job, I'm actually head of the catering operation at Stockton-on-Tees Council, so it was a bit of a trek to get here. We provide 10,000 meals a day into schools and work alongside schools in offering a different offer. Trying to, as nationally, we all try to meet the school food standards. That we're waiting for the new ones for this year, so that's the focus on my day job. But in answer to the question about the prevalent and unhealthy diets, the school meal is only around 30% of a child's actual intake of food, and although there are some ultra-processed foods on some menus in primary schools, it's a big focus nationally to get away from that. We're working with suppliers to make sure that every item that we put into schools does meet the food standards as best we can. Some members are struggling with the funding element of it because the food prices have, as we all know, have exceeded what we get funding for. One of the focuses that we have across LASA is education in children, and we try and support schools in the farm to fork element, and that is a big focus that a lot of children, like my colleagues have sort of said, there are a lot of children who don't know what, like Bea said, what things look like, what things feel like, but what things taste like. And as as LASA and local authority caterers, we focus on trying to make sure that every child has access to everything that wouldn't normally have, whether it be in an affluent area or a high area of deprivation, particularly the area that I work in. And the Royal Society of Public Health have said, the 28% of children aged between 2 and 15 are either overweight or obese. And that statistic is dreadful moving forward, because these are people who are going to take over what we do now. And that's the worry, isn't it, about moving forward. We should be looking after the health and well-being of our children and young people. And also one of the other things that we work with suppliers for is food manufacturing and packaging, and what's sort of sexy out there, if you like. The offers that people offer away from school, and this is why we try and encourage children to stay in school, particularly in secondary schools. But you can take a horse to water, and it's very difficult in secondary schools. It's like what Naomi alluded to. It's that queuing element. People want to come in, get something and get out. And the education, I think, working with schools is going to be a big focus.
Thank you. Anita, did I hear you say earlier that The school food standard would cost more than the amount of money that you're provided with to provide it, or did I misunderstand?
No, the school food standards, if I use something as an example, the amount of oily fish we have to put on every week, that we try and address that. At the moment, that is beyond the money that we're getting in, because we get £2.53 for an allocation for a free school meal, a universal free school meal, where our neighbouring nations get in excess of £3. So not every authority can manage that to meet those standards to that level because of the food cost and the cost of living crisis that we're all in.
I see, thank you. Baroness Boycott.
There are two quick questions for Anita. I mean, one is, I chair Feeding Britain, and one of our researchers a couple of years ago found out that council, when cost of living crisis, all the budget squeezes, councils themselves were removing a little bit of the food budget as it went through, and teachers themselves were removing a little bit to pay for textbooks because food always gets squeezed. And the other thing, in a way, I want to comment from everybody, how important is universality to the school meal? Because whenever I've visited schools, you have some people having packed lunches, some people. Is it economically much better for you to do universality overall? And how important is it psychologically and in terms of the way the children eat?
I mean, ideally, yes, we would love universal free school meals for all. That would be a fantastic solution and would be an amazing solution, because, we have issues with families, and I'm sure my colleagues will back me up on this, where those who are on that benefit level where they just don't get it. If you've got
£7,000.
And it's once you're over that and you've got 2 and 3 children, parents' perceptions think that a packed lunch is a cheaper option. Whereas, yourself, when you're shopping, sometimes that isn't. And it's also parental awareness and education on what goes into a packed lunch, what people perceive to be healthy. You only have to look at the green labels, and not everything what a child brings, what a parent might think is healthy, isn't. So if we were able to give free school meals for all, that would solve a massive, massive problem, I believe, in this area.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, we have a big panel today, so if when we come to you, what you want to say has already been said, can you just say, I agree? I'd be grateful if you would. Baroness Suttie.
Thank you. I'd like to move on now to the specific influences on the diets of children and adolescents that contribute to the risk of becoming obese. Could I start with Georgie, please?
Yeah, so most urban schools are surrounded by lots of fast food outlets. Research has showed that more than 400 schools have upwards of 20 fast food takeaways within a 400-metre radius. At the request from schools, my team have been outside school gates with stopwatches, clocking the time that ice cream vans are parked and trading to children at the end of the school day. And on top of this, we know from research from our friends at Bike Back that children and young people are exposed to multiple adverts on their way to and from school, and this translates into food-related ill health, which is why the food environment within the school gates is so important, and why School Food Matters has developed a programme that ensures that schools are a healthy zone. Children spend 190 days at school each year, and therefore it's vital that the culture and provision of school food promotes children's health. The 3 specific influences I wanted to briefly talk about are branding on food packaging, food labels, and celebrities. The programme I manage, Healthy Zones, supports breakfast and after school clubs to improve the food provision. And we witnessed firsthand the power that the cartoons and the colourful packaging has on children's food choices. We encourage breakfast club staff to decant cereals into sort of glass dispensers to remove that association with brands, and that helps to deter the children choosing those items. And it also allows the clubs to save money by being able to buy unbranded supermarket-owned products that are also quite often less sugary. And the same can be done with many other foods. By simply taking them out of the packets, putting them on a plate, they become a lot less attractive to children. Labelling on food packaging, as mentioned by Anita, is really confusing. We offer training to the club staff in schools and talk to secondary school students about how to interpret traffic light labels and the health claims that are on products. Taking yoghurt for an example, low fat often means more sugar. Then there's free sugars, natural sugars, added sugars, labels listing the different types of sugars, sucrose, fructose, glucose syrup, some labelled sugar-free. They're actually sweetened with artificial sweeteners. And we're expecting school staff who are time poor and ordering these foods for clubs and older students to be able to interpret these, to be able to choose the healthier choice. And just quickly, finally, on the power of celebrities, when we speak to students about drinking more water and the importance of it, we often refer to the famous Ronaldo clip where he showed a public show of disdain of Coca-Cola, the brand that was sponsoring the tournament at the time, and removed the 2 bottles of Coca-Cola that were put in front of him and picked up his water bottle and said, "Drink water." And this gets a really positive reaction from students and opens up the conversation about why drinking water is important. But unfortunately, this is one of the few cases where celebrities are endorsing the healthier option.
Thank you very much. Anita, you touched on this a little already, the power of influences, but would you like to add anything else?
Yeah, another big power of influence for me is social media. Speaking for children within my own family, what you see on social media, and also peer pressure. Again, we alluded to the time of getting in and out, but when your mates are wanting to come in and grab something quick or bring a packed lunch and go, or leave the school premises if they're so allowed, because they've got time to do other things, and like these advertising boards and everything else. But social media is a big issue, and advertising and packaging, it's something we struggle, it's a big battle against.
And B, would you like?
Yeah, I mean, to add to what's been said already, and I thought Georgie spoke very powerfully about celebrity and the ways in which the ultra-processed food industry marshals the power of celebrity, and it just strikes me they do that in a very targeted way with children's interests, including with sporting events. So when young cricket fans might switch on TV to watch the 100 over the summer, they're not really watching cricketers on a field, they're watching these giant human crisp packets running around. And that's just one example among so many. I wanted to speak about the role of preference, which it relates to everything that's already been said in terms of ultra-processed food marketing and your point about social media. I think that's really powerful. But I think we need to look more about the fact that these preferences, as Vicky Simpson was saying this morning, the influence is created by the ultra-processed food industry, but they can become set incredibly early. And we know that a child is learning and becoming imprinted by positive flavour memories, even in utero. There have been some really powerful studies done in the States by someone called Julie Manella and Gary Beauchamp, who are at Philadelphia, that if you feed mothers a lot of carrots during pregnancy, the baby will then have a preference for carrot-flavoured milk after they're born. There have been studies in France doing the same thing with garlic. But what you actually have to imagine is that what so many children are ingesting during that period before they're even born are the flavours of ultra-processed food. And we know that that imprinting continues from earliest childhood onwards. And following on from Baroness Boycott's point about the free school meals, something that I found incredibly striking on the question of preference is that these wonderful infant free school meals, which every 4 to 7-year-old is entitled to, it's been one of the great reforms of recent years. I saw it, how it's changed, made life so much better, that universality which should mean everyone's involved and bought into it, reducing the stigma for those on free school meals. And yet there's still not universal take-up. The Ofsted report into this in 2018 found that take-up was only 82%, and it was lower in areas of high deprivation than in wealthier areas. And Ofsted professed themselves to be puzzled by this, but they then quoted caterers saying, the caterer said, well, a lot of parents find these foods unfamiliar and they think their children won't like it. So I think when we talk about influences, we've got to talk about preferences and shifting those preferences away from those sweet, fatty, salty flavours onto whole food, onto fruits and vegetables.
Thank you. And Naomi, do you want to?
Thank you so much. Just echoing everything everybody's all said, really, but to give a couple of examples in terms of influences, in terms of advertising that happens particularly in secondary schools. We still have kind of pre-packed products being sold into secondary schools, things like yogurts and snacks and things which are being sold under the banner that they're school food compliant, as though that's a kind of halo that means because they're not against the standards that they're therefore good for us. So things like biscuits, mini cheddars, muffins, all packaged up and available for sale. On the subject of yogurts specifically, because our friends at Food Foundation did some really good research around this, looking at, obviously, yogurt, great source of calcium, however, also one of the top 10 containers of sugar going into kids' diets. I had a look through one of the main wholesalers' catalogues at the 8 yoghurt products that were being sold into schools, and only 2 of the 6 didn't have any added sugar going in. Some of them had as many as 3 teaspoons of sugar per 100 gram. So the reason I'm saying that is to look at the kind of solutions for tackling that. We have to look at, first of all, totally agree, education. We have to make sure that the education that we're giving kids in school is holistic, that what we're teaching them in the classroom about healthy diet and nutrition is replicated in the food that they're being served in the dining room. That I feel very strongly about. There's more that we need to do on that, and the key bit that we need to do on that is really beef up, freshen up and enforce the school food standards. We're 10 years on from the school food plan. The standards have never been updated. And in secondary schools, it is incredibly easy to create a product and label it as suitable for schools. The only final bit I just wanted to say, we work directly with schools. There's about 118 schools have gone through our core programme. In the schools that we work in, we're training up and empowering school kitchen teams to teach kids about food as well as serving them up food. In those schools, 88% of school leaders tell us they've seen an increase in fruit and veg consumption with the kids. 82% said that's also leading to improved behaviour, and 65% said they're seeing an improvement in concentration as well. It's not actually that revolutionary. It's fresh food, it's nutritious. We don't generally call it healthy because healthy has a whole bunch of stigmas attached to it. We just make tasty food, and it's not all healthy. It's about balance, and it's about teaching kids cake is great once a week. There's a whole bunch of other interesting things that you can eat.
Thank you. I go to Baroness Jenkin now, please.
Yes, thank you, and I declare my interest is on the website. I also like to say I have visited a Chefs in School, and I highly recommend it to colleagues, though we did take a long time to persuade one child to eat any vegetables at all, but we did our best. So what role does food in schools play in supporting healthier diets for children and young people? I wonder if you could touch on breakfast clubs, because you talked about cereal, and we've heard quite a lot of evidence that cereal is not the solution. And what are the main barriers to the availability, uptake and quality of the foods in schools? And we've obviously touched on some of that as well. Thank you. Perhaps, Naomi, you ought to start since it's...
Yeah, certainly. So on the subject of breakfast, again, breakfast should be regulated by the school food standards, as in fact they are, and a sensible update to the school food standards would involve a sensible update to give a clear direction to breakfast club providers of what isn't acceptable, and that might say that the amount of sugar in a cereal could be limited or other products could be available. In terms of the impact that school food can have, we know that there's good evidence that decent school food can lead to improved nutrition in the moment, but also have impact on influence long-term food choices. There are 3 actions I think that this committee could recommend that could take away some of those barriers that's stopping great food going on every school plate at the moment. The first action we'd recommend is a mandatory accreditation for every school looking at food quality. There are some really good accreditations out there. Our friends at Sword Association have accreditation called Food for Life. Something like that for every school, so that we know that there's a minimum level of quality, and alongside that, a minimum level of training that the people who work in school kitchens need to have. They need to understand the school food standards, they need to understand a bit about child nutrition, and they need the same level of continuous professional development that everybody else in a school gets, which means culinary training. The second, I've talked about it a lot already, updating and enforcing the school food standards. I won't say any more on that. And the third is reviewing the funding that's going into schools to make sure, alongside those 2 measures, to make sure that there is enough funding going in to properly invest in quality on the plate and to properly invest in the workforce who are delivering it. So those are the 3 recommendations that we'd make.
Thank you. I mean, the point I'd want to add to that would be that, as well as Naomi says, hugely improving provision of food in schools, we need to look at the offering of food education. So if we go back to the Fell report, which is the major review that's happened in this area over the past few years, it happened in 2017, they found that there was nearly universal, excellent knowledge of the Eat Well plate among British children. But this was not mapping onto their food choices. It was not mapping onto their eating behaviours. And I think if we look at this question of healthier diets for children, I would point to Amartya Sen's theory of capabilities and freedom, which is that you can't just give people rights and access to something without checking if they're capable of using it. So if you provide children with good food, which in itself isn't necessarily a certain thing, but we have at least 3 people in this room who are doing excellent work in this area. You also need to equip them with the preferences so that they want to eat it. And so much food education to date, especially if you look at nutrition education, and again, the Fell report goes into far more detail on this, there is a statutory requirement in theory to teach cooking and nutrition at primary school, but many schools were not really delivering anything beyond make a fruit smoothie. And a huge amount of nutrition education, as the example of the Eat Well plate shows, is purely theoretical. It doesn't deal with the senses. It doesn't ask, have you ever actually held an apple in your hand, never mind bitten into one? And until we actually change food education to become something experiential and related to real food and what children are actually eating, we're not going to make the kind of progress we should, even with improving provision. Improving the provision is essential, but to get everyone to benefit from that, and also to reduce food waste. There's a huge amount of food waste, even when there is good quality lunch in schools, and a lot of that is due to vegetables and salad being thrown away. So it would be beneficial in economic terms as well as for the children themselves.
Thank you. Georgie?
Yes, so I think that the areas that schools can play an important role is access, which I know I need to feel strongly about again as well. Providing quality free school meals for all children will address the inequalities in access to good food, and there's evidence that we'll come on to later about the positive impact it has on children's health as well. Breakfast, think of breakfast specifically. There are school food standards for foods outside of school outside of the lunchtime meal. That they are quite complicated. When we do an exercise where we get schools to print their menus, their breakfast club menus if they have them, after school clubs, lunch menus, and we get them to try and do their own checklist. And it for a sort of someone who's not nutritionally trained, it is quite a complicated process. And the sort of lack of monitoring and accountability of school meal uptake, and as well as in clubs, of the uptake and of the quality of the provision is a big barrier, and these are both strong indicators of where there's good practice as well as where support is needed. The national indicators was the last data set of school meal uptake, and that was 12 plus years ago. The second thing schools can do is adopt a whole school approach to food. I know we've touched a lot on food education and how that can help rectify the detachment that a lot of children have with where foods come from. And one example that we've had from a school is a school that was delivering a maths lesson was measuring the cucumber they'd grown to check whether it was ready to be harvested. And the boy burst into tears and said, "It's not ready yet, the plastic hasn't grown round it." Which is just the reality for a lot of children and young people, and schools can be a great place to connect with children with where food comes from. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the barrier for schools to have the time, resource and expertise to go through the tendering and procurement process that draws up a decent catering specification that puts quality school food at its core. When we're out in schools supporting them to make changes to their menu that would improve uptake and quality, the contracts in place are often the block where they've been designed with a cost focus over quality. We've also found that local authorities can be in a great position to support schools, and where we've seen a dedicated role in a local authority to support schools specifically on school food. For example, a school food improvement officer, their value is really seen in local schools.
Thank you. And finally, Anita.
Thank you. As everything has already been said, a whole school approach is really, really important. And as LASA, we've actually developed workforce standards as well for all our members to make sure that that is available for all our members to pass on to their workforce, because our workforce are our diamonds, they're our gems, and you know they're the ones that see the children that we feed every day. And there are some children you'll never feed. You know that there are some children that just want to take what they want to take, and our workforce is the key to making sure that I can't be in every kitchen every day nationally, and the colleagues of LASA are exactly the same. But funding is a big issue as well with schools, and also the limited resources in what we've got in the way of kitchens. So we want 100% of children to stay, but schools don't always have the environment. They don't have the dining facilities, they don't have the kitchens, they don't have the equipment. You know, we got funding 10 years ago for equipment when Universal Infant Free School Meals came in. That equipment is now 10 years old. And all those things add to, we all want to produce more and feed more children, but we have to have, the infrastructure to be able to do that as well. And obviously agreeing everything else with what my colleagues have said. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add on the breakfast point and the equipment? Is some of the barriers are, for example, if we think about bread, toast can be great if the bread is not full of preservatives, but that happens to be the one that is, that lasts the week for school breakfast clubs. It's already sliced for them. It's got the packaging which kids are familiar with and therefore more likely to try. So if we are to move to buying more fresh bread, we need the sort of scary knives that lots of teachers are reluctant to use. They need freezers, back to the equipment space, to be able to freeze them to make sure that they last for the duration of the week. So yeah, that's affecting clubs as well as lunchtime.
Thank you very much. Can we move to El Caithness, please?
Thank you. What is the influence of the food industry on young people's and children's diets? What should it be, and how are you going to make them do what they should do?
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing to say is that the food industry isn't just one thing, but many. When you say food industry, you could in fact be talking about excellent school caterers, you could be talking about chefs, you could be talking about farmers in the horticulture industry, which I think, given we've been talking about fruit and vegetables so much, it's astonishing the extent to which we've neglected the role of agriculture. We should be growing a great deal more of our own pulses and legumes in this country. So there's that. I think there is a benign side to the food industry. I mean, I would love to see people making money out of selling children and their parents food that gives them health rather than gives them ill health. So there's huge potential for the food industry in this very diverse sense to act in a benign way. We all need food. We can't all grow all of our own food in an allotment, sadly. But if what you're asking about is the ultra-processed food industry, I think, as we've already touched on with the sports and the social media, its influence on children's palates from the very earliest stages is profound, it's malign, it's hard to unpick. And one of the reasons it's hard to unpick and unravel, which we haven't really discussed so far, is that it insinuates its way into the most precious relationship there is, which is the love between a parent and a child. And it insinuates its way into celebrations. And it tells us that the way that we express love is to give our child a treat. And that's an extremely powerful message, because every parent ultimately wants two things. They want to see their child eat, and they want to see their child made happy through food. And there's this problem with children's food, which is that there's a short-term thing, which is you want to see your child smile and have a full tummy, which is what happens today. And then this long-term thing of the person they're ultimately going to become. It's very, very hard for a parent to be thinking about that long-term thing when you've got a sad little face not wanting to eat what's in front of them. And I think unless we engage with this love relationship, which plays out through ultra-processed food, healthy eating initiatives run into difficulties. And it's Jamie Oliver, who actually has done almost more than anyone in this country to improve school food, but he still gets berated for that moment with the school food revolution that he was creating, when parents were feeding chips and junk food to their children through school gates. And it was this iconic moment, but it does speak to a truth. And I've come across it myself in schools years before I set up Tasted with Jason and others. I was a school governor, and I was endlessly organising healthy eating weeks at the local school. And one time the head teacher asked me to come in and talk to the children about food choices. And when I was talking to the children on the school meals, that was absolutely fine, because I could say to them, well, you've chosen a main course and this, but is there anything missing? And then they could just go back to the salad bar and take their vegetables. It was fine. But the packed lunches, there was one girl who cradled her lunch and said, no, it's my mum. And I realised I didn't want to be intruding on that beautiful relationship. And what we do with Tasted is it's not unique to Tasted. I'm sure that what Naomi's doing is the same. You have to work with parents, and you have to make them feel supported. And some of the feedback we've had, which we've got our project manager here today, Fran Box, who's gathered all of this feedback. Portland Kindergarten in Lincoln, which is an area of high deprivation. And what they say is they've had parents thank them for taking on the task of teaching their child to like fruits and vegetables. Because we know that there's all this data saying if you want to get someone to like something, you have to try it 10 to 14 times. For a parent, that's 10 to 14 times where you might be throwing food in the bin and seeing your child's little unhappy face. Whereas if you can have a nursery or a school taking that work, it's not emotional for a teacher to do that. It's fine. It's very easy. And what I found with Taste it's fine offering vegetables to other people's children. You don't feel anything like as much as you do. So really what I'm saying is the influence of the ultra-processed food industry on children currently, it's huge, it's pervasive, and we need to tread very delicately and carefully and think about how it plays out in families as well as in schools.
Thank you. I would 100% associate myself with all of those comments. I couldn't agree more. To answer the question of what influence the food industry should have on children, and in my particular world, in the world of schools, I would say for the majority of the food industry, none at all. Thank you very much. We'd like you outside the door. For the food industry that's involved in delivering food to kids, and for the food industry that brings the fresh ingredients for that to happen, excellent. Let's get them even more involved. I want to give a couple of examples of where I think we're getting this completely wrong and where legislation urgently needs to step up. I want to give you an example of a product made by a high street brand called Wafflemeister. I don't know if people are familiar with Wafflemeister. They have a number of stores that you can go into and get a delicious treat dessert if you like. And last year they brought out a product specifically designed for primary schools, marketed, in fact, into the education catering industry as perfect for primary schools. That product, about 35 grams, about half of that was fat and sugar, and the other half was 17 other ingredients, of which I can't name them, and some I probably also can't pronounce. Products like that, and I'm not picking on them, I think unfairly, I don't think belong in schools, and I don't think particularly they belong in schools when the state is paying for a third of the children in England to eat a school meal. The state has huge power in the 1.4-ish billion pounds a year that we're spending on school food to make sure that that doesn't happen, and to make sure when kids are having a treat in school, it is a treat, and it's something that's homemade with ingredients that we all recognise. That, I think, we could definitely do much better on. In the schools that we work with, we're doing things like bringing in, our co-founder, when she first started working in schools about 10 years ago, decided to bring in rice farmers and get them to come and talk to the kids about how rice was made, and they gave every child in the assembly a single grain of rice, and you can imagine how well that turned out. We've learned a lot in 10 years about educating kids about food, but a lot of it is still about bringing in things that are fun and engaging, that are also showing kids there's a career in hospitality out there for you. Food is something that is pleasurable, that is fun. It can also be a really great career. And we're seeing probably 3% of kids leaving school interested in a career in food, because we're not creating food as something that is joyful, that is pleasurable, that is also potentially a great source of career. So that's where I'd like to see more influence of food in schools and less from the high street brands.
In the interest of saving time, I won't mention the other brands that are also reformulating their products to be school food standard compliant. But there are a bunch of them doing it, and ultimately we should be pushing for fresh, nutritious food for our children. These companies are part of the bigger problem causing that detachment that many children have about where food comes from and how ultimately a potato becomes a chip on their plate. I did just want to mention Radler Fizz as an example of a drink manufacturer that's developed school food standard compliant drinks, just because there is so much panic in students' eyes when we mention that we're going to be removing Radler Fizz from their shelves, which just really shows the power of branding influencing children's food choices and drink choices. We don't want children spending their lunch money on drinks that have got no nutritional value, bad for their dental health, when water fountains should be freely accessible as the drink of choice. And I also just wanted to mention something that was published in the National Food Strategy, that the market share of public food procurement is dominated by a few large suppliers, which creates little incentive for innovation and improvement. So I agree with Naomi. I think it's unrealistic to expect the food industry to do better without some sort of regulation. These companies ultimately exist to make profit for their shareholders and investors, and tighter regulations are needed, particularly within schools.
Nita.
Thank you.
I think food manufacturers have made some great strides in reducing fat and sugar content, and although a lot of the food that is classed as school compliant, 10 years ago we didn't have that. So the food manufacturers have made great strides to that. But one of the issues that we have is marketing strategies as well. We'll go back to social media, in-store offers, special offers, bog-offs, meal deals. Places children can go at lunchtime away from school where they can get a meal deal for £1, £1.50, £2 that is extremely unhealthy. And they're the outside elements that we need to address also. Can we not have anything within a 5-10 minute walk of a school where fast junk food can be offered? And like Georgie said about the ice cream van turning up at schools, they don't support what we're trying to do as later offering children a two-course healthy hot lunch at lunchtime, and in some cases that's the only meal some children will get. So the focus has to be on the healthy meal that we provide, and all our members strive to provide. But also, again, we go back to the funding element. If families can get something cheaper, but also as operators as well. Some operators do use buy-in products, but they are school food compliant as best they can be, and we continue to work with food manufacturers to make sure that happens.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lord Brooke.
Lord Chair, morning. How effective are current government approaches in supporting healthier diets for children and young people? And I do quite a bit of work on school meals and regulation, and I'm constantly told that the food that is served at schools are healthy and nutritious. What do you think about that?
I would agree as a school operator. Sorry, was that coming to me? Sorry.
No, it's
I would agree. I mean, we offer all our menu as like I say, we've done the work for school with school food standards. We work with the workforce standards that LASA have developed. We do an awful lot of work at LASA with allergens and supporting schools with children with special diets and allergens. But our focus nationally is providing a healthy, nutritious meal. We work with suppliers, we support our members, we work with food manufacturers, but we're up against marketing and offers, social media, the school food standards, which should be monitored better than what they are, and again, if we go back to funding, adequate free school meal values is a big consideration in schools. And if we look at the 4 nations, like I've alluded to before, in Scotland they're getting £3.30. In London from September they're getting £3. The rest of us in England are getting £2.53. So we have to do the healthy and nutritious 2-course meal for significantly less than other nations are getting. And even like London is getting much more now anyway than the rest of us. So for us all to be able to do the school food standards offer, we should be getting the same amount of funding. And there are lots of issues, particularly like with, Ofsted used to check on food. Ofsted don't do that anymore. Action for Children support parents and carers with guidance to work on a healthy lifestyle. But more needs to be done with that also, particularly with families suffering from deprivation, and those with low income don't have a choice in some cases what they can offer their children to eat.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the evidence that shows that there are things that are working. The evidence for the National Universal Infant Free School Meal Scheme, for example, that's been rolled out in England since 2014, has been shown to reduce obesity rates amongst children in their first year in primary schools. There's also more recent evidence published last month of the universal free school meals for children up to the age of 11, which was rolled out in several local authorities in London before the Mayor's Fund came into play this academic year, which also shows that it reduces the proportion of reception-age children living with obesity by between 7 to 11%, and also reduces the proportion of Year 6 children living with obesity by around 2 to 5%. So both really encouraging bits of evidence showing that universal free school meals positively impacts children and young people's health. And the research also found that there was an increase in the uptake of amongst the number of already eligible children once all their peers could also enjoy the same provision. So it helps those which are coming from lower income families as well.
So I think I would I've talked a lot about the regulation that I think is necessary, and the point I would also like to make is regulation alone isn't enough. We also have to set the tone that what we feed kids in school is important, and that the food and the food education kids receive in school can be a really big part of the solution. Part of that is, I think, on funding. I will say that in some of the schools that we work with, that state school in Streatham I was talking to you about, they're managing to break even with the funding that they have at the moment, and they've done that by encouraging 100% participation. They've phased out packed lunches entirely, and when they're trying to reduce the cost burden for some parents who can't afford to pay, the chefs who are running the kitchen are baking bread and selling it to other parents and making fermented hot sauces, and they're being creative in how they're doing that. But in reality, it is incumbent, I think, on government to make sure that there's enough funding available to put decent meal on every plate. I think Anita talked about the funding for free school meals, and I don't disagree that funding needs to increase, but that only accounts for a third of the people who are accessing the school meal system. 2/3 are parents. And when we polled parents back in back last year with Servation, a full third of parents said we can't afford to buy a school meal at all anymore because it's too expensive. So I do think there is something clever to look at how we fund and support schools, particularly smaller schools. But funding alone isn't everything. You also need inspiration. You also need a workforce who are equipped and empowered to deliver great food and to link it to food education. And the only way that we're going to do that is through training and is through really believing in and investing in them.
I wanted to mention two areas in which I think government approaches in supporting healthier diets for children and young people are lacking. One is something I've already discussed, which is the failures of food education, especially at primary school, to be practical enough. But I think I just wanted to talk really more about what a huge missed opportunity this is. I mean, it's just one of the very, very few chances we have to intervene and positively influence a child's lifelong nutritional habits, which will turn their health outcomes around, which has benefits not just for the child but for society. And part of why school is such a golden window of opportunity, it's not just the hours they spend there, which I think is something like 32 and a bit hours a week, but it's something we don't talk about enough, which is the potential power of positive peer pressure. And this is something we see time and time again in the Taste-Ed classroom, that it's sometimes much easier for a child to try a new fruit or vegetable away from the slightly emotionally charged atmosphere of a family dinner table, surrounded by friends. And this is something which has been extensively studied in the secondary literature. There's a huge literature on the ways in which human appetites are fundamentally social. There was a brilliant psychologist in the 1930s called Duncan, who went into a couple of London nurseries, and he got slightly older children to make a food choice between some different types of fruit or some brown bread or a carrot, I think. And without fail, what the older child in front of the queue chose, the slightly younger child behind them would immediately plump for the same option. Mm-hmm. And we can take this peer pressure, which is one of the things that's been harnessed by the ultra-processed food industry to influence children, and we can use it for good. And it's just such a golden opportunity there that's getting missed. So I think the failure of government to harness food literacy as something that needs to be taught in schools, and the ways in which we judge a school as, Jason could talk about this better than I can, but we judge a school as having failed if they haven't taught children about fronted adverbials and lots of things that actually in adult life, I'm a writer, I never talk about fronted adverbials, but we don't judge it to have failed if someone has reached the age of 11 and never tasted a raw tomato or never felt an onion. So that's one thing. And then the second way in which I feel government has hugely failed to support children, but also families in healthier diets, is through this HFSS description of foods. And I know it came up again this morning. I've been following along with interest the Chris Van Tullecken session, which I thought was excellent, and the Anna Taylor session as well. And this is one of my examples of why I think HFSS is a really poor concept for children and families. If you go to the Change for Life NHS website, this thing Change for Life, which offers nutritional advice, is the official advice coming from our own national health body. It will suggest as an after-school snack for children a sugar-free jelly, which, if you come back to the dictionary definition of food, it just isn't food. How can that be a good snack for children? And I think if you look at ultra-processed food and the Nova definition through the lens of children. And when Vicky Simpson, who I think is now left, just said at a certain point, well, children do need food. And I think that should be obvious. Grown-ups actually need food too. And I think Nova has sometimes been misunderstood. The part of it in a way that's almost more important than category 4, which, as you know, and you've heard extensively, is ultra-processed food, is category 1. How do we shift the balance of diets back towards those whole, minimally, there's no such thing really as unprocessed, but minimally processed foods, which even a child, once they've been taught it, could recognise and name and hold and smell and tear apart. And it would do them good and it would nourish them. And I think that's a key, huge area of government failure.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to move to Baroness Boycott for the final question.
Chair, are we okay to run over time a little?
Well, we can go till 1:45.
Oh, thank you. So what are likely to be the most effective strategies for improving child and adolescent nutrition and reducing associated health inequalities in the future? And what evidence supports your proposals? And I'd like to start that question with you, Anita, but I just wanted to check one thing that came up before, which I'm puzzled about. Some schools do not have water fountains, because part of how you allocate the price for a meal does include a drink, doesn't it?
In primary schools, yes.
In primary schools. So
yeah.
in some primary schools, children end up buying a bottled drink.
We wouldn't put bottled water into primary schools, but most primary schools do have water fountains, but they get jugs of water or they get a water...
What happens to the money allocated within the £3, whatever, for the money for the drink? Because somebody told me that it ended up in some schools that you ended up buying either bottled water. I mean, it was kind of insane.
I mean, that what happens in secondary schools. It's a cash cafeteria system where a student would go and buy a bottle of water.
Right.
So they can buy, they would get their allocation, whether they've put cash, if I use a payment card, for example, so they've put cash on a payment card, or their free school meal allowance would go onto a payment card, which helps with anonymity, of course. But they can choose to buy sort of the drinks that have been mentioned.
Would it be true that some schools don't have freely available water fountains, or is that absolutely not true?
I wouldn't know nationally, but I could find that out for you.
Could you?
I could, okay. Indeed.
Thank you. Can we come back to the question now?
Yes, certainly. So, LASA work a lot with a company called Parent Pay, and in 2023, well, they do it annually, working with ourselves, they do a huge survey with all the parents that use their system, which is around 250,000 parents. And a lot of the information that came out was 58% of them take up a full school meal provision, 84% have a school lunch once a week, 96% of those eligible for free school meals, some of them only do take that once a week. So again, that's a strategy that needs to be more developed. 24% actually take a packed lunch because their friends have it. So that's another thing that we're really up against. The survey also highlights that families who don't take a free school meal, who are entitled, particularly in secondary schools, it's because the children want to grab and go and get out and take something quickly. So that's an issue. And we would like a meal service that's funded consistently throughout the UK, like I've already mentioned about the 4 nations. And something else to look at is the physical education in schools. That's an issue because of a longer education time, but shortened lunch time to do sport and activity. You know, we would work with schools to do that. We need to be mindful of the grab and go culture, like I've mentioned. You know, people just like to grab and go, and it's become a real struggle. And something that is a big focus is children need role models, and we all know that as busy parents, you know, are we educating our children at home as well? Is that happening at home? Is it a social activity? I know when I was a kid, you know, we sat down and if you didn't eat your dinner, you didn't get anything else. Whereas now it's just like children can go off with a tablet or an iPhone or watch telly while mum's doing something quick and easy. And I think it's not just about education in schools, it's about education at home. And that's something that we could work with schools. It's about the education that's been already mentioned with the knowledge that our children need.
What about the proliferation of fast food very close to school gates?
Sorry, can you say that
the
again?
Proliferation of fast food outlets very close to school gates so that you can whip out at lunchtime or post-school.
The Royal Society Public Health Survey did actually say that there was 68% had responded saying that they should be banned within a 5-minute walk of any school gate. Most schools do have a closed school policy now that they don't allow children out at lunchtime, which is a huge benefit because if then, they bring a packed lunch or they stay for school lunch, which is a big focus for us, obviously, want them to stay for a school lunch. But that you will never get away from the fast food offers that are tempting children away from school at lunchtime.
Yeah, I know when I worked at London Food Policy that fast food companies would apply for planning to be near schools.
Yeah.
They would actually target it. And
Unless there's a policy to make sure that they don't.
Unfortunately, although a lot of schools do have the closed school policy, the delivery people are actually delivering to the school gate in some cases.
That's a really good point.
What do you think about that?
Okay.
Can I answer that? And
Yes,
say,
do.
Completely
Naomi,
shocking.
come in.
And I have seen that. I've seen kids ordering on Deliveroo and then the Domino's arrives at the door. If you want a single effective strategy, then every single child eating a hot meal, not a grab-and-go meal, but a decent, full balanced meal in school every day, family dining style. I've seen it done in secondary schools really effectively. That's the best way. And then you know for your money that the child is getting a nutritious meal. And they're not going to do what a lot of kids in secondary school do, which even when there is a closed gate policy, they'll come in, they'll buy a couple of slices of pizza and a chocolate yazoo at break time, and then they'll wait till the end of the day to go to the chicken shop. And again, if you go outside any school at 3:30 p.m, you'll find all the kids in the chicken shop that's 5 minutes down the road, regardless of that. There are a whole bunch of things that need to happen to make sure that happens effectively. The first of which is school lunchtimes in secondary schools. Lunchtimes in secondary schools. And again, for me, this is about signalling. We're signalling that food in schools isn't important. We're not going to fund it very well. We're not going to increase the funding in line with inflation. We're going to see it as a cost burden to reduce. If we can switch that around and if we can say it's all very well and good that we educate kids and they come out with great scores in maths and science, but if they're too unhealthy to work, then the state hasn't done their job. I'm much more interested in the moral argument, but you do have to make the argument economically as well.
We're also looking for your practical solutions to the problem that we're facing.
Yes, how would we achieve that? I mean, what does the government need to do to get all the school eating a healthy meal altogether?
Well, so I've talked about the power of regulation and what needs to happen there. I've talked about the fact that lunchtimes in particular would need to be extended, so we'd have to work with schools in order to make that happen. Investment would need to be made into kitchens and dining rooms to make sure that they're big enough to accommodate. So these are things that have been modelled financially. PricewaterhouseCoopers did some work looking at universal...
How much would it put on the budget?
So the universal provision of school meals in over a 20-year period would return a significant net benefit to the Exchequer, but there would be an upfront cost, and I can write to you with the specifics.
Could you?
Of
and
that.
The return on it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how many schools do it?
I've got the returns. It's for every £1 invested in school food for all, £1.71 will be returned over a 20-year period, which is almost £100 billion.
You have more to add, Naomi, to that question?
Only that as much as we've talked, and sometimes it does take a Baroness double daring you to eat your vegetables in school. Sometimes it is difficult, but it is possible to get kids eating better in school, and we must take the actions necessary to make that happen.
Thank you. Georgie?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on your water fountain query at the beginning. I don't think we've ever come across any schools that have not got a water fountain, but quite often the students, when we survey them, they use, there's only 2 in the school, it's a huge school, a lot of that comes down to funding, but a lot of it's stuff that actually can, quick wins, they talk about the cleanliness, the sort of taste of it, not having bottles and cups, it's more of a sort of thing that can change with a little bit of educating about the importance of water, and by removing physically the other drinks available, they will drink it. I think, again, I've talked about it a lot. One of the most effective strategies would be to invest in free school meals for all, starting with an immediate extension to all those in receipt of universal credit. We have evidence that would reduce childhood obesity and health inequalities. The quality of school meals is also really important, as touched on a lot, and this would be improved by updating the school food standards to reflect SACM's advice on fibre and sugar intake amongst children's diets. We know the standards are associated with improvements in children's diets. Our surveys of secondary school children show that 3/4 of them don't feel like they need a sugary dessert after every meal. And in 2016, the government committed to updating the standards. However, this remains an ongoing review. The third proposal is around mandating mandatory reporting of school food. A framework needs to be in place to provide accountability and ensure quality provision. When we're out about in schools, it's really hard to have a conversation with head teachers about prioritising school food when there's no regulatory framework to refer to, whereas we know what's required by Ofsted does get a response from schools. We were really pleased to hear about the positive results from phase 1 of the School Food Standards Compliance pilot coordinated by the Food Standards Agency, and we look forward to the report later on in this year.
Should this come under Ofsted or under a separate body?
That is hopefully what the pilot is going to reveal, whether someone else can do it. But what we do know is that Ofsted is recognised by schools and it works in terms of improving
other stuff.
Other stuff.
Can I just agree with that entirely and say that it could be as simple as Ofsted just asking governors about their legal responsibilities.
And are they up to speed?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Would you recommend that, though, that it was carried through Ofsted rather than something independent?
I think that the pilot that the Food Standards Agency have done with the Department for Education looks as though it's showing good results. So it seems to me like there is a good route there. However, I think if any head teacher, and I ask this question to every head teacher that we work with, what would be the most effective way of getting the head teachers who aren't as engaged with food? And they all say Ofsted. So if there is a route, even if it is as simple as asking governors about their responsibilities, it's another indicator that food is important.
Yeah, thank you, B.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said. Yes, much wider preschool meals, ideally universal, primary and secondary. Totally agree with what Anita said about role models and how, when we talk about food education, we need to look at the home as well. And I know Henry Dimbleby referenced South Korea as an example of a developed nation that managed to pass through economic development with lower rates of obesity than the UK. And one of the reasons was that the government invested in cooking workshops. And I would love to see families supported in that more. Completely agree about water in schools. I think it's crazy that water isn't just the universal drink in schools. And you look at the city of Amsterdam, one of the first places in the world to bring down childhood obesity. One of the measures was just saying water's the only drink. It seems so straightforward and obvious. My proposal, I've got two versions of the same thing, a more ambitious version and a less ambitious, more pragmatic version. Both of them are to do with food education. The ambitious version is this. We need a complete overhaul of the food education curriculum in England. It's hugely unhelpful. Food as a subject is currently spread across design and technology, which seems a very odd home for it, and it doesn't really link to any of what we've all been discussing today. Science, and then relationships and sex advice, which came in a few years ago, where it has a section on healthy eating and calories. But when you look at the content of food education in the curriculum, it's almost completely empty. And I think this is both reflection and cause of the fact that, as Naomi said, food is simply not valued highly enough by the Department of Education and therefore by schools. And the cooking and nutrition curriculum, which I think came in 2014, and that was a step forward, and I believe the wording was written maybe in part or maybe in full by Henry Dimbleby. It begins with this wonderful declaration saying, instilling a love of cooking in pupils will open a door to one of the great expressions of human creativity. But it doesn't then go on and say anything about how to do this. The whole curriculum for Key Stage 1, so that's ages 5 to 7, reads, use the basic principles of a healthy and varied diet to prepare dishes, understand where food comes from. And there's just no guidance, no concrete guidance for teachers. How do you do this? What are the concrete steps? And if you compare and contrast with the maths curriculum, it doesn't just have some huge statement about maths being human creativity. It tells you that by the end of Key Stage 1, a child should know their number bonds from 1 to 20, and they should count to 100, and they need to know the plus and minus sign. And if we were to properly overhaul food education curriculum, we'd do the same. It would be about food literacy. In a certain year, we shouldn't have the situation where children are leaving primary school not having tasted basic fruits and vegetables. So you could either say they should have tasted 10 fruits and vegetables in reception and a further 10 in year 1. You could specify it, you could quantify it. We need to do the same for cooking. We don't just say you need to use the basic principles of a healthy, varied diet to prepare dishes. You should actually say, in Jason's school, it's astonishing. 3-year-old children learning knife skills. And they're safe because they have gloves. We should be learning knife skills in this year. We should be learning grating in the next year. We should learn soup. We should learn salads. It should be quantified. And we could also add growing projects in. So that's what I believe should happen. And my evidence that this will work is that, A, if you look at the secondary data, the only food education interventions which really seem to affect healthy eating and practice are experiential ones. And B, when it comes to reforming school food, several people have already mentioned this, a multi-component or whole food approach is what's needed. So you have to join up what happens in the canteen with the education. So that's my real proposal. But the non-ambitious version is that because we've worked so hard to make TasteEd a totally pragmatic tool for teachers' busy lives now, you could do it without changing anything about existing curriculum. You could make a recommendation that taste education, a minimum of 5 lessons for every year group, is a required scheme of work for all age groups from 3 to 11, and this could happen immediately. And our lessons are already designed to tick those boxes of existing curriculum in D&T and science and RSHE, and they also deliver other things. So, for example, we've produced lessons where there's a 5-week course where you can deliver year 3 plant science through food. Great Fire of London through food. So those are my 2 things. Thank you.
Very much. Now, I've got 2 supplementary questions to come. Do the panel have another 5 minutes? We could carry on? Okay, so I'll ask the 2 to be asked one after the other and then see who can answer them. Lord Caithness and Lord Krebs.
I just want to pick up the point about free school meals, because it slightly contradicted B's point about the love of a packed lunch. Is that a detrimental effect? What would be the cost of producing free school meals for all primary children and then all secondary children? Because it's all very well having a wish list.
For that, will we?
Yeah, I don't think we have that.
But unless it's costed.
Perhaps if
someone has costed. It has been costed, and we'll
it has been
I don't have that in front of me.
It has been
could write to us with the cost. I know it has
Indeed.
been.
Yeah.
Lord Krebs.
Thank you, Lord Chair. Mine's also a cost question, which is part of the same question. What would it cost to reconfigure the infrastructure in schools in order for there to be enough space to provide all the children at primary and secondary level with the opportunity to eat free school meals? And I think this was a point you raised, Anita.
Yes,
it's not just the dining room, it's the kitchens and all of that. And I know from my experience in Oxford that even in a posh area of Oxford, although the comprehensive offers school meals, there just isn't enough space for all the kids to eat them. So there isn't a big enough dining room.
Yeah, dining rooms are an issue. And schools have multi-purpose rooms as well, so it's not a case of just having a dining room. It's usually a school hall.
Got to be a space big enough.
It has, indeed.
Everybody sitting down.
Do you know? Does anybody know if that has been costed? The need to upgrade the facilities.
The work that PricewaterhouseCoopers did, costing universal provision, included the capital investment required, and we will submit that.
Okay, that's
you do it on a rota system, don't you? So
So the way that the schools that we work with tackle this, because particularly a lot of the schools in London have gone from, say, 70-80% uptake to nearly 100% uptake with the rollout of universal primary meals, is through having staggered lunch breaks and managing them quite effectively. Actually, in London, in our experience, it hasn't caused a great deal of issues, and even the infrastructure in the kitchen has coped. But I will accept that London is not necessarily always the best test case for the rest of the country, and when we go to parts of the country outside of London, it's obvious that investment would be needed. If we want to do this properly, if we don't want to just do this as a kind of half measure, and I would... To B's point around education, I would fully agree with that. And I could take you to the Hackney School of Food, a cookery school that we built with kids there. And I could show you 11-year-olds in Hackney who 2 years ago didn't know what a courgette was and now know how to dig it out of the garden and turn it into a delicious fritter that they want to eat. Food education is really important, and we should be ambitious. And the recommendations you make should be ambitious, because 1 in 3 kids in the poorest parts of this country are leaving primary school with obesity, and the scale of our ambition should be the same as the scale of the problem.
That's a really good thing to say.
And I thank you all very much indeed for the evidence you've given us this morning. It's been very, very interesting indeed. And remind you that the transcript will be sent to you. If you have any corrections to make, please do that. And with that, my lords, the public element of the meeting is now concluded.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.